All right, so we're going to take a look at perfect squares and cubes in this lesson here. We're going to start with perfect squares, and then we're going to move on to perfect cubes. Now, when we think about a perfect square, okay, most of you should understand that a perfect square is a quadrilateral four-sided shape, okay, which has 90-degree angles in each of its corners, and all four sides are exactly the same. Now, you know what a perfect square is. I mean, you've done this for years. You understand that a square is this shape right here. Okay, so to find the area of the square, we can use the formula A equals length times width, or we can use like A equals a base squared. So let's say that this is the base length. This is the base as well, right? It's the same length. You can use the same variable for it. And so in this case here, if we just do B times B, or B squared, we're going to find the area of that perfect square. Okay, so if the area is given, we can also work backwards. So if we're told that, let's say that the area of this square is, let's say, 36 centimeters squared. Okay, so let's say this is 36 centimeters squared. Okay, and based on what we know here, if we want to find what the side length is that works on that, we need to find a number that multiplies by itself to get 36. Well, if we say that area equals B squared, 36 centimeters squared is equal to B squared, well, then to get B, we just have to take the square root. Okay, and so we've done this in the past as well, but if we take the square root, okay, of that, this will give us just B, and this would give us 6 centimeters. So that tells us that both those sides need to be 6 centimeters. Okay, now that's kind of how we can find a side length if we're given this here. Now, if we have something that we can call a perfect square, okay, so a perfect square is a number or area which has the square root or side length, okay, so area, side length, or a number and a square root, that is a natural number. And a natural number are things like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. So not 0, but kind of all those numbers that are going up there as such. Now, so that's a perfect square. So if we take something like 1, the square root of 1 is 1, so 1 is a perfect square. Square root of 4 is 2, so 4 is a perfect square. Square root of 9 is 3, 3 is a perfect square. If we look in between there, so let's say the square root of 7, that gives us a decimal number. Okay, so 7 is not a perfect square. Now let's look at some perfect squares here. 1, 4, and 9 are all perfect squares. That's what we looked at here. And if we want to find the next ones, okay, and we can kind of go up in order here, okay, it'd be things like 16, 25, 36, which is what we had there. So we know that's a perfect square. Okay, 49, 64, 81, that's 9, so then 100, 121, and 144. I just about blanked there on 11. Okay, so this is how we would find, these would be our perfect squares. And now there are infinite number of more perfect squares, and we can kind of use that to kind of solve certain things or take a look at certain things. But it's important to kind of see what are perfect squares. Now, we can use prime factorization to determine is something a perfect square. And if you really want a video of that, send me a quick message and let me know. And I can show you a video of how we can use prime factorization for that. But for the sake of this course, I just want to go over, can we find what a perfect square is? And we can use our calculators for that. Now, on your calculator, again, we have a whole bunch of buttons. We know the square root button right there. And so we can use that to figure out perfect squares. So something like 36, which we kind of already know is a perfect square. Okay, if we do square root of 36, okay, in our calculators, we get a number of 6. So the square root of 36 equals 6. So this is a perfect square. Okay, because it doesn't give us a decimal when we do that. Okay, let's try 2,916. Well, that's a little bit above our numbers that we have there, but if we do square root 2,916, we get the number 54. So the square root of 2916 equals 54, no decimals. So in other words, that is a perfect square. Now you might be able to guess what this next one is or is not. Okay. Now it's an odd number, which doesn't make any difference because we have odd numbers in the perfect squares there as well. Okay, every other one's an odd number. But an odd number, if we square root that 577, okay, the other two are perfect squares, so this one's probably not, right? Well, who knows? We got to double check here. We square root, we get 24.02. Now, if you round it to one decimal place, it's technically a whole number, but, okay, this is not a perfect square. It has to round perfectly, okay? Anything just slightly off won't work. Okay, if you do 576, that gives us exactly 24, but 577 is not 576. So in other words, this here, square root of 577 equals 24.02, and then a bunch more decimal places. So this is not a perfect square. Okay, and it's important that we understand it has to have the exact decimal place to be a perfect square. Okay, so exactly 0 as a decimal place.